There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube, and Happy New Year! I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel, and in my mind, it's the last Friday Reads of the year, but that was actually last week's. I'm filming it on New Year's Eve starting at 20 minutes to 10 in the evening, and you won't see it until Friday, January 2nd. The only news I have is that I've been using the treadmill every day since I got it, and since I got it set up. And today, and one other day this week, I actually did 40 minutes. So I just got off the treadmill. I'm all sweaty. Thought it would prick me up to record such a late night Friday Reads. I'm also busy preparing for my besties and worsties of 2025. So there's all kinds of things going on. But that's why I'm filming my Friday Reads on Wednesday night. I have nothing left to tell you other than that I did a lot of reading, edited a lot of videos, and was on my treadmill. Oh yes, and I did get 2 videos edited and posted this week. The first one was my Winter 2026 most anticipated releases, so check that out. Lots of good stuff coming up soon. And the second one was the full chat that I had with Japanese to English translator Yuki Tejima, a Japanese American who has been living and translating in Tokyo for some years. She was my mystery guest back in maybe March. The conversation was taped in March. There wasn't room to include everything, so I finally posted for your viewing pleasure the full unexpurgated version, and oh my god, is it fascinating. Do check it out. So, let's get to the books. I finished my last 2 books of the year, and I'm going to be starting a bunch. And then we'll do my new format for my Friday Reads. I started it about 3 or 4 weeks ago, is no more mystery guests, and around a 4-book haul at the end, so people that aren't into book hauls can just stop watching the video at that point, or maybe they already have turned it off, but that's what I got for you today again. I loved these books. They were both extremely moving and beautifully written, so let me tell you about them in no particular order. I finished them both today. This is a queer novel set in the Ukraine called The Sunflower Boys by Sam Wachman, and it's a debut novel, came out this year, 2025. And it's a coming-of-age story, and the story starts a few years before the Russian invasion and then continues through the first few months of that horror. The narrator, he's 12 years old at the beginning, and I think he might be about 15. I forget, but something like that. Maybe 16 by the end of the story. I did this mostly on audio because the audio was so good. I did have a quibble with the audio. I wanted it to be in a Ukrainian accent. It was in a very American accent, but it was otherwise an excellent audio narration. And Artem comes from a tight-knit family, just one brother, loving mother. Father has been working for years in America, and we find out later in the novel why that is economically necessary. That has a lot to do with Ukrainian culture. So he's mostly present in the novel for the first long while on the phone. Although he does come back for a visit, maybe about the halfway mark or something. And then Artem's best friend is Victor. And Artem develops romantic feelings for Victor. It's quite a sweet story of family and friends and blossoming gay love. And then the war starts. And then it becomes a real tragic story. I thought it was so well done. The thing that I didn't like, but I'm not taking a star off because everything else was just so wonderful, was I didn't feel like the gay love story between Artem and Victor was embodied. I didn't feel those characters. I didn't feel Artem in his body as a inchoate, proto-gay young kid. We didn't ever hear about anything going on in his body. There was one moment and it was the spark of his realizing that he was attracted to Victor as more than his best friend, because they were always teasing each other about who was taller. And so one day, and they're about 14 years old at this point, one of the mothers or somebody said, okay, turn your backs, stand together. And so he touched his back, presumably his backside, but shoulders touched Victor's. And that sparked something. But other than that, it was really all heady, and I just felt there were other moments when the absence of any description of what was going on, and I am talking about erections, sure, but more than that, just there was nothing embodied to repeat myself, about his attraction to Victor. And there were times later in the book, when in the tragic part of the book, where they had to sleep beside each other. And again, no reference to what's going on. I don't mean that they're having sex and the author's choosing not to tell us. That's not what I mean. But that is a big turnoff for me in my reading, is if the characters don't seem to have bodies. And yet this was still a 5-star read, because that was almost beside the point. Because the coziness and lovingness of the family life and the friends down the road was so well done. And then when the invasion, it happens in Chernihiv. And it was one of the early cities to fall to Russia. And, oh my God, it's just gripping. And boy, is everybody in their body about that. It was just tough reading and really poignant and beautiful and heartbreaking. So I can just ignore the feeling that I thought that the love story part was not that visceral. Was not visceral enough for me, because everything else absolutely was. Sam Wachman is interesting. He's a Ukrainian-American from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he taught English over in Ukraine before and maybe during the invasion. I don't know too much of the details, but he's actually got his CV posted on his website, which I'll link in the show notes. So he's not Ukrainian as in terms of being born there, but he's Ukrainian in terms of his ethnicity and his culture and the fact that he was over there, which makes all of that so vivid. I think he's queer too. I'm assuming he is, because he wrote one other thing that's on his CV that's about queerness. But that part I didn't think was vivid enough to impress me. But absolutely everything else about this wonderful debut novel, The Sunflower Boys, deeply did. And the other book that I finished today, and then the last book that I finished in 2025, is the American novel, the British-American novel, Birdeye by Judith Heneghan. Judith was my mystery guest over a year ago, I think. I'll put a link to that wonderful chat in the show notes. And I have just gotten to reading her novel at the end of this year. I loved this. The things that I didn't necessarily like, they were more in the form of curious questions rather than I thought, oh, this is a flaw. But one of the things was the protagonist, Liv. She's a British woman who's lived in America for 40 years or more. So the story is really in New York, but she's British and one of her daughters is living in London. But it's very much otherwise set in the Catskills of New York State. And Liv is 67. And she has been running a kind of hippie commune in the Catskills in upstate New York for about 40 years. And she's getting tired and old, and her health is not great. And so she's just wondering how much longer she can carry on, but she doesn't want to give it up. Her daughter, who is the complete opposite to her, the one that lives in London now, is putting a lot of pressure on her to give it all up and come and live with her in London so she can take care of her and the daughter's twin sister. There's twin daughters. Rose is the one who lives with Liv in New York, and she was born intellectually disabled, and she is 40 years old or something, and she lives with her mother and is nonverbal and so on. The other daughter is the one that's really a businesswoman, no nonsense, not into this woo-woo hippie stuff, is the one that lives in London. So there's so much going on here about parenthood and about the kind of social justice work and being heartful in regards to communal living. Can you do that and be a good mother? All these questions are swirling throughout the story. The other thing that I wondered about, and just curiously, is that Liv, the protagonist, she seemed much older than 67 to me. She seemed like 77. She was always overwhelmed, but she had also had a double mastectomy within the last year or so, so I think that affected her health. But she was a really wonderfully, fully drawn character. I just thought, she really only 67? She seems like almost 80 to me. But I don't know if that's a quibble or just, that's fascinating to me. A stranger, a young man, comes in the opening pages of the novel, and he wants to live there, but everybody else in the house is really suspicious of him. He ends up being a really important character, and his whole story, backstory, and him in the present is very central to what happens in the novel. So it's A little bit thrillery at times, not too much, not to the point of being a bad thing, because too much of that nonsense and it's a bad thing for me, but just the right amount. But just a marvelous character study of a woman who is selfless and deeply flawed, wounded healer, whose own backstory is absolutely fascinating, and who is much better at ministering to others than to taking care of herself, but just in a really nuanced way. Birdeye wouldn't be a book for everyone. Not very many books are. But if you like the sound of what I said, I do very deeply recommend it. And I'm hoping to interview Judith Heneghan about it. And getting that interview put up in the hopefully not too distant future. Great read. All right. So I am starting 3 books. One I will have already started by the time this Friday Reads goes live, because I'm having a Zoom discussion about it January 18th, I think. So I got to get busy. This is Edith Wharton's memoirs, or autobiography, A Backward Glance. I just put it in a book haul the other day, so I don't need to say much about it, but this is for my Edith Wharton book club with Dorian, James, and Chris. And it's 350 pages, so I hope I enjoy it, because I got to spend a lot of time with it in the coming weeks. And I also recently hauled this early short story collection by Sharon Butala, Queen of the Headaches, 1985. And boy, it's getting high reviews from anybody I know who's read it recently, originally in 1985. And so I'm going to be buddy reading it with Heidi of My Reading Life. We're going to do a story a week, and the first check-in is going to be Monday. The Mission. I read the opening paragraph when I included it in the book haul the other day. That's a great way to start the year. And in January, I will be starting 2 buddy reads with Joe Smith. The one I'm starting this week with Joe Smith is an anthology of short stories. It's called A Different Sound, Stories by Mid-Century Women Writers, edited by Lucy Scholes. Came out 2023 from Pushkin Press, and I think I don't need to say anything else about it, but the first story, the one we'll be checking in on Thursday of next week, is by Frances Bellerby, who I've never heard of. A lot of the women writers included here, I'm very familiar with their writing, but I've never heard of Frances Bellerby, and the story's called The Cut Finger, so I'll have a little capsule review of that next week. Hey, I almost forgot, I am also starting a new audiobook, and it's one of those ones that I got on Spirical, and I haven't acquired a copy of the book that goes with it, but it is on archive.org, so I'm going to do it on the treadmill, starting tomorrow. It's a 1938 British novel called The Squire by Enid Bagnold. I don't know anything about her, and I eventually want to get my hands on that gorgeous Virago Modern Classics edition. But for now, I will just start it on audio, and if I need to dip into the ebook on archive.org, I shall do so. There isn't much on Goodreads about it. Awaiting the birth of her 5th child, the Squire talks with her younger friend, Carolyn, and gains a new perspective on her life. I guess I don't really know what a squire is. I thought they were always men, but obviously not, so I'll tell you more about that next week too. Edith Bagnold, I've just checked, who became Lady Jones. Her dates are 1889 to 1981, and she is best known for her story, not a novel, I guess, a short story called National Velvet, which was made, wasn't that one of the very early Elizabeth Taylor movies? And there's probably more to learn about her as well. So there you go. All right, let's move to the book haul. The first one is a memoir of sorts. Yeah, it's called a memoir. It's by a preeminent Japanese to English translator, Polly Barton. It's called 50 Sounds, a memoir of language, learning, and longing. I'm going to enjoy it so much because it's about learning Japanese. I know she spent quite a bit of time in Japan. She's currently based in Bristol. And I also, another reason I got this is I bought the audiobook first. I had, for about 6 months, I had a subscription to Spirical, which is a non-Amazon related audiobook company that you should check out. But I couldn't keep up with, I got a range of audiobooks to choose from, and I was getting them, but I wasn't getting to them, so I just stopped. I'll listen to some of them and I'll come back. And so I downloaded the audiobook of 50 Sounds. I bought it through my subscription to Spirical, so this will be an audio text combo. The opening paragraph of the preface and the first chapter, they don't have a standalone vitality, but I found a paragraph a few pages in that does. In the preface, the language learning I want to talk about is a sensory bombardment. It is a possession, a bedevilment, a physical takeover. It is streams of sounds pouring in and striking off scattershot associations in a manner so chaotic and out of control that you are taken by the desire to block your ears. Except that, even when you do block your ears, your head remains an echo chamber. The language learning that fascinates me is not livening your commute and scoring a dopamine hit with another 5 in a row, way to go. That's a reference to Duolingo, I think. Rather, it is never getting it right, hating yourself for never getting it right, staking your self-worth on getting it right next time. It is getting it right and feeling as if your entire existence has been validated. It is the kind of learning that makes you think, this is what I must have experienced in infancy, except I have forgotten it. And at times it occurs to you that you have forgotten it not just because you were too young when it happened, but because there is something so utterly destabilizing about the experience that we, as dignified, shame-fearing humans, are destined to repress it. It is a learning that doesn't know goals or boundaries, and which is commonly known as immersive. The image that springs to mind is a lone figure wading gallantly into the sea, naked, without a single swimming lesson behind them. That was incredible. Next, a work of local Saskatoon history. I went to the book launch for this. It is called Strangers in the House, A Prairie Story of Bigotry and Belonging by Candace Savage. And she started doing research on the house in Saskatoon where she lives, and it was so interesting she wrote this book. It was originally published 2019, and then the paperback edition is 2023, and I went to that paperback book launch or whatever. She found out that her house had been built in the 1920s by a French-Canadian, Napoleon Sureau de Blondin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And there was so much bigotry, so much prejudice against French-Canadians that he had a terrible experience in Saskatoon. And the book's all about that. Sounds fascinating. Opening paragraph. For almost half a lifetime, going on 30 years, I have lived with my family in an unassuming wood-framed house in a quiet city on the northern edge of the Great Plains. 5 minutes' walk to the west lies the shining, low-slung valley of the South Saskatchewan River, with a view across the water of downtown Saskatoon and the fairy-tale silhouette of the Besborough Hotel. The streets around us are gracious, with wide boulevards and grassy medians, lined with ranks of towering elms. My young daughter and I were lucky enough to arrive here in springtime on a big, blue, blustery day when the trees were juicy with new leaf green. I can still remember the sappy joy we felt the first time we walked down our street, amazed by the extravagance of this welcome. Next is a queer novel with Dominican-American characters. It's called Loca by Alejandro Heredia. I can't remember where I heard about this because I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. I think I might have been on a podcast or something that came out this year, but I haven't heard any buzz about it whatsoever. Does anybody else heard of this? It sounded interesting. Starts in 1999. Best friends Sal and Charo are in New York City trying to hold on to their dreams. And a lot of their life is spent at the gay clubs at night, but they have other things to be concerned about during the day. That's all I need to know. What's the Goodreads rating on this? Yeah, it's got a respectable Goodreads rating, 3.68, but with over 1,000 ratings. So lots of people have read it, and that's a pretty good rating, I think. And it's just the way the book feels in your hand. I'll read a few the opening lines. Sal stands by the kitchen window, bathed in morning light. If I catch the next train, he thinks, as he hurries to scrub a plate clean. His resume is in his bag. His shoes are by the door. His speech is coiled tight in his mind. I'm ready, he whispers to himself, but then he looks out the window to the sky blemished by a flutter of birds. Pigeons are pigeons everywhere, he thinks, in that city and in this one. Suddenly, he can't move. The suds on his knuckles turn translucent. The faucet drips and drips. An hour later, all he can move is his hands. He palms his burning forehead, runs his fingers atop his small fro to make sure his head is all there. Then he pulls the handset sitting on the counter and braves the call. Oh, you're back already? Charo says. I didn't go. What? I was standing in the kitchen and, he says, but how to explain it? And another of the ones, I told you I got a box of Canadian Lit because I had considered to be an influencer for Canadian Lit. I was nominated to receive, like several book influencers did. And this one is by an author that I haven't gotten along with so far, and maybe this will be the one to turn it around. It's the Trinidadian Canadian writer, Shani Mootoo, and her most recent one, Starry Night. Came out in 2025. Her most famous one is Cereus Blooms at Night. I don't really get along with that at all. That's all I've tried. This one opens in the first-person voice of a young girl living in 1960s Trinidad. She's 4 years old, and we follow her until she's 12. And then it goes from there into her parents' lives. That's enough. Opening few lines of chapter 1. Barlow grips my arm with her soapy hands. I can barely look in her eyes. When I do, even for one tiny second, I see in them the ruby-red water gushing down the sloped open gutter on its way out of the yard, under the backyard wall, and whoosh into the municipal gutters beyond. Give your grandmother a little break, child. She have other things to do. Stop getting on so. Let me bathe you. I scream, tug, and pull. What's wrong with you, child? Behave, nah? Here's an odd duck I picked up at a thrift store. And it's called The Shepherd of the Hills by Harold Bell Wright. First published 1907. Written by, quote-unquote, the acclaimed novelist Harold Bell Wright. Have you ever heard of it? Set in the rugged Ozark Mountains during the late 1800s. The complicated lives of simple mountain folk are played out in a beautiful tale of love, hate, and ultimately forgiveness. And I guess the setting is also Branson, Missouri. So it's a facsimile reprint type of thing. Apparently published by the Harold Bell Wright Museum in Branson, Missouri. I don't see a publication date anywhere for the reprint. Let's hear a little more about Harold Bell Wright. He was a best-selling American writer of fiction, essays, and nonfiction. His dates are 1872 to 1944. Mostly forgotten or ignored since the mid-20th century. He was supposedly the first American writer to sell 1 million copies of a novel and also the first American writer to make $1 million from writing fiction. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. I'll read the first 2 paragraphs from chapter 1. It was corn planting time when the stranger followed the old trail into the Mutton Hollow neighborhood. All day a fine rain had fallen steadily, and the mists hung heavy over the valley. The lower hills were wrapped as in a winding sheet, dank and cold. Trees were dripping with moisture. The stranger looked tired and wet. By his dress, the man was from the world beyond the ridges, and his carefully tailored clothing looked strangely out of place in the mountain wilderness. His form stooped a little in the shoulders, perhaps with weariness, but he carried himself with the unconscious air of one long used to a position of conspicuous power and influence. And while his well-kept hair and beard were strongly touched with white, the brown, clear-lighted eyes that looked from under their shaggy brows told of an intellect unclouded by the shadows of many years. It was a face marked deeply by pride of birth, of intellect, of culture, the face of a scholar and poet. But it was more. It was the countenance of one fairly staggering under a burden of disappointment and grief. Well, that doesn't necessarily do anything for me, but it also doesn't necessarily turn me off of trying the book at some point. Let's see, what's the Goodreads rating for this? I think I've already checked it out, and it was pretty high. Yes, I remembered correctly. Apparently it's the first in a series, and with almost 4,000 ratings, it has a 4.23 star rating. Oh my goodness. So that is my book haul, and that is my Friday Reads, what I consider, eccentrically, to be my last Friday Reads of the year. Happy New Year. We'll see you all next week. I'll have lots to tell you, I think. Thanks for watching.